Welcome back, Book Dragons. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I'm going to be sharing with you my picks for audiobooks that I think you should really check out. And I just want to say right from the get-go that if you listen to audiobooks on a regular basis, you are still a reader. I firmly believe that listening to audiobooks is still reading because ultimately it's a book. It's not like it's an adaptation of a book. It's an actual book that you're just listening to the words being read. So it's still reading. You can't convince me otherwise. And so let's go ahead and get right to this list. I'm excited to share it with you. And I have 12 audiobooks on this list. 7 are fiction, 5 are nonfiction. And these are books that I think are a must read. So I hope you'll check them out if you haven't already. And at the very top of my list is The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. The only way to experience The Dresden Files, in my opinion, is by using the audiobooks in tandem with the physical book. So you're doing an immersive read, you get to see the words on the page, and you get to hear the illustrious voice of James Marsters as Harry Dresden. Well, he does the other characters too, but I mean, the most important one is Harry Dresden, right? If you've never read the Dresden Files, it focuses on a wizard named Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden, and he's a wizard in modern-day Chicago that works as a private detective. It's just a really, really great series. It works so well. And if you're a fan of James Marsters, you may know him from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He played Spike. He is phenomenal. There is no better way to experience them. There are a couple of audiobooks that have other voice actors as well. Jim Butcher narrates the audiobook for his novella, The Law. And in my opinion, Jim Butcher isn't that great at audiobook narrator. He's fine, but I really miss James Marsters for that one. So just keep that in mind. Listen to all the other audiobooks with the exception of the ones that have Jim Butcher narrating it. Just my personal opinion. But such a great series. I highly recommend The Dresden Files. And yeah, and if you don't want to do an immersive read, that's fine. Do the audiobooks. They are fantastic. The next series I want to talk about is The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. Now, in my personal opinion, the best way to experience these books is audio. I read the first book in ebook format without the audio, and I almost DNF'd it. I came pretty close, but then I finished it, and I had been told by numerous people that the audiobooks are the best way to experience it. So I did the audiobook for the other 2 books, and it was phenomenal. One of my favorite series. And I don't typically read historical fiction, but this series is based in Arthurian legend, and it is just absolutely fantastic. Probably one of the better Arthurian stories out there. And also, make sure that you get the books narrated by Jonathan Keeble. Jonathan Keeble is a fantastic audiobook narrator. I just absolutely loved his performance of the audiobook. One of the books can be found with a different narrator. I don't recommend going with that narrator. Not that he's bad. I didn't listen to it. I only listened to the one with Jonathan Keeble. But Jonathan Keeble is definitely the way to go for these books. The next series I want to talk about is the Dispatcher series by John Scalzi. This was an audio original before it got put out in physical form. I think it's in physical form now. It may only be an ebook other than audiobook, but the way his contracts are set up for that series is it was an Audible exclusive first, and then after that it released an ebook. So the original was done in audiobook, and Zachary Quinto from Star Trek fame and Heroes fame is the narrator for the audiobooks, and it's a first-person narrative like the Dresden Files is. I don't think I mentioned that, but it's a first-person narrative, and Zachary Quinto plays the dispatcher. This is a world where death has been eradicated, and so in certain circumstances, someone has to come in and dispatch people if they die in a horrible way so that they go back to the original spot that they were at before they died, and the dispatcher is that person. So Zachary Quinto plays the dispatcher. It's phenomenal. He of course does the other voices as well in the audiobook, but he's the main character in the story, and it's just fantastic. I think he's a great audiobook narrator. I hope he does more. And this list would not be complete without something from Neil Gaiman. Now, I have loved all of Neil Gaiman's audiobooks, and the majority of them he narrates himself. But this is not one of those. This, guys, is The Sandman. And of course, it is Neil Gaiman's signature work. It's what put him on the map. But this is the full cast audio production of The Sandman on Audible. So if you have an Audible subscription, you can listen to this. It may be on other audiobook formats now as well, but Audible is where I listen to it. And it's great for people who are wanting to experience The Sandman, but don't really do graphic novels, but you just happen to like audiobooks. The reason for that is it adds visual cues into the story so that you know what's happening on the page, even though you're not able to see what's on the page. So essentially what's happening is you're getting an audible description of what someone might see on the page if they were reading the graphic novel. But other than that, the story is completely unchanged. You are getting the full Sandman experience, but with a little bit of assistance to help you know what's happening in the pictures on the page. And I think it's just phenomenally done. Neil Gaiman does play a part as the scene narrator and things like that, but then there is a full cast that are performing the Sandman series, and it's absolutely bonkers, guys, how good it is. I absolutely love the choice of James McAvoy to voice Dream, aka the Sandman. He does a phenomenal job, and he just brings such gravitas to the role of the Sandman that I just think it's spectacularly done. And I know they've got a different actor in the Sandman series on Netflix, and he's great as well. Tom Sturridge is amazing, but James McAvoy does a fantastic job on the audio book. So there are 3 volumes of Sandman out right now. There is a 4th coming. I don't know if they've actually started production on it yet. It takes time to schedule all the voice actors and things like that. So eventually it's coming, but you can listen to the first 3 right now, and they're phenomenal. Another one that is related to Neil Gaiman is the Good Omens audiobook. And this, again, is a full cast production. And I'm going to specifically recommend the newest one to you, which has David Tennant and Michael Sheen reprising their roles as Crowley and Aziraphale. Oh my gosh, guys, that is the only way to experience this book on audiobook. Other than that, it's completely unchanged from the book, and you just get this wonderful full cast production. Good Omens is one of my favorite books, and I just really hope you'll check out the audiobook version. And the next series on this list is the Bobiverse series by Dennis E. Taylor. And it's just a phenomenal series, guys. There are 4 books out right now. The 5th one is coming out in September. And just like with The Dispatcher, they are audio first originals. And then they get physical releases later on. So this is definitely one you want to experience on audio. It's a lot of fun. Ray Porter is the narrator, and he's just phenomenal. He does it so well. Does some of the voices really well. And you're really only following one character, which is Bob, and he is the consciousness of a human uploaded into a computer many years later. And I won't go into details about how that happens, but it's really great. It's really funny, actually. And he just sets about on this expedition exploring different galaxies and learning about the universe, and it's just a really fun ride. And over the course of the series, you get multiple Bobs, and it's hilarious, guys. You need to read this series. And it's very nerdy, especially Star Trek nerdy. So if you're a Trekkie at all, in any manner whatsoever, you need to read this series. I think you would have a lot of fun with it. I've been slowly buddy reading this series with my good friend Carl over at Geek on My Sleeve, and it's just so much fun, guys. So yeah, read the Bobiverse series. Book 5 comes out in September. I'm so excited. I can't wait. And the last fictional audiobook that I have on this list is a standalone, and that's the original by Brandon Sanderson and Mary Robinette Kowal. I think this was a really fun audiobook to listen to. Again, it's an audiobook original, although Brandon Sanderson does have plans to release a prose version of it. So if you prefer to wait for the prose version, that's fine. But I highly recommend the audiobook. It's a really great sci-fi original, no pun intended. And I just had a blast with it. And I'm not going to go into details about what the plot is. You can look that up for yourself. But I definitely recommend checking it out, especially if you're a Brandon Sanderson fan. If you've read Outside the Cosmere and you want to check this one out as well, he does a really good job with sci-fi. I'm pretty impressed. And eventually we're going to get some sci-fi in the Cosmere too at some point. But yeah, the original's great. I highly recommend it. So now let's move on to nonfiction audiobooks. And this is my preferred way to experience nonfiction especially. With fiction, I tend to prefer reading the actual book, but I do enjoy audiobooks on occasion. But with nonfiction, I tend to prefer the audiobook because it's kind of more like I'm getting a lecture or listening to a podcast, that kind of thing. I just process the information differently. So these are my recommendations for nonfiction books that you should check out on audio. And the first of these is Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. I've read several books by Cal Newport, but Digital Minimalism is probably his best and most well known, and probably his most popular as well. And I can't remember for sure, but I believe Cal Newport narrates it himself. I'd have to go back and check that. This is essentially Cal's treatise on why our saturation in digital products and platforms is probably more harmful than good. He doesn't think it's all bad, but he does detail a lot of issues that are arising from being so saturated in all things digital, especially social media. And he offers a path to do what he calls a digital detox. And I have done one of those with some modifications of my own to what he suggested. It was very helpful. It was very freeing. It gave me a good rest from the digital experience. So I highly recommend reading this book, even if you don't agree with everything in the book, which I didn't. I didn't follow everything to a T. You're going to get some real nuggets of wisdom there that's going to help you be more mindful about how you approach technology and social media and things like that. So I highly recommend Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. The next book on this list is The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. Alan Watts is known as the father of Zen in the West. So he is the one who really catapulted Zen philosophy in U.S. culture. I'm really glad he did. It's a phenomenal book, and you don't have to be deeply immersed in Zen Buddhism to enjoy it or anything like that. It's very palatable for your average everyday person who just likes to have a little bit more balance and calm in their life, and it's just a phenomenal book. I highly recommend anything by Alan Watts, but I think The Way of Zen is one of his best works. And then another book that is somewhat related, but not entirely the same, is 1000 Names for Joy by Byron Katie. This is her look into her own personal life and how the philosophy of Taoism which is similar in some ways to Zen philosophy, has impacted her life. And she shares some really poignant stories in this book about her experiences and how she wrestled with the thoughts in her mind versus what the reality really is, and are they different or are they the same, and how does her perception differ from the actual reality of things. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I was recommended to read this book by a good friend of mine, and I'm so glad she recommended it to me because it just really touched my life, and I highly recommend it for anyone, even if you're not into Eastern philosophy or anything like that. You don't have to be to enjoy this book. There's just a lot of things about reinterpreting what your mind is actually thinking about something and how that can better your life as a result. Another book that I highly recommend to you is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. You may be familiar with Trevor Noah. He's a South African comedian who also has a late night talk show, or at least I think he still does. I don't follow it on a regular basis, but Trevor Noah is a lot of fun. He's really funny. He does narrate the book himself. It's a fantastic look into his life and how he experienced racism, but in a kind of different way, because growing up in South Africa, it was common for black people and white people to kind of coexist. But when you're born a person of mixed race, that's when it becomes looked on as a crime. He is mixed race, and so he experienced a lot of trauma and ostracism as a result of his birth. And so this is his story telling about his experiences growing up in South Africa, and it's just a beautiful story. I highly recommend it to anyone, and it's funny. He presents it in such a lighthearted and humorous way at times that it's kind of disjointed from the subject matter. It's a good way to disarm you when you're reading a story like that, and it kind of takes the weight of it off of your shoulders a little bit, but at the same time it doesn't change the information that you're getting from it. So I highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal book. And then the final book I want to talk about is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, narrated by Stephen West. This book was really interesting to me. It's a whole study on the documented advantages of getting good sleep and the detriments to our health and longevity if we don't get enough sleep. And it really changed my outlook on sleep and realizing that I probably need to get better sleep than I do. And it was just fascinating to listen to. There's a lot of information, some of it somewhat technical, but it was written in such a way that it wasn't dry, it wasn't boring, anything like that. So I highly recommend reading Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. And that's the end of my list for audiobooks that I would recommend to you. I definitely think they are must reads. Let me know in the comments below what audiobooks you would recommend to me that you think are must reads. I've heard quite a few people recommend any audiobook narrated by Stephen Fry, and I've got several on my list. I know the Harry Potter audiobooks are narrated by him. I know that there's a set of Sherlock Holmes that is narrated by him, which is actually already on my Audible list. He also has his own books that he's written on myth and folklore that he narrates personally. So I know that Stephen Fry is a really popular one, and I love Stephen Fry, so I will eventually be reading those as well. So definitely check him out as well. Even though I have not listened to them yet, he comes highly recommended from other people. So that's one I definitely know. Let me know some others in the comments below, please. I would love your input on this. And until next time, guys, make sure you are reading more books in whatever format you prefer, and I will talk with you very soon. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank my patrons. All of your support really means a lot to me, and I thank you for what you do.